So this presentation is brought to you by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation. Ray Harryhausen and me. Now, I'm the me in this picture, so looking very young there. That was the late 1980s, 1989. And wearing black to try and make myself look older. I don't think it really worked. But more about this later. We're going to be showing this student film, which I've recently restored in high definition, and it's getting a special screening here today. Now, who here has heard of Ray Harryhausen? I expect almost everyone has. I'm seeing a good show of hands there, fantastic. For people who don't know who Ray Harryhausen is, they certainly do know his films. And when Ray died in May 2013, Hollywood responded. And you can imagine there's quite a selection of movie creatures to choose from. And in a final vote, where there's only a bare percentage point between them both, the skeletons from Jason and the Argonauts, or the children of the Hydra's teeth, if you're a fanboy, as you'll know them, was pipped to the post by the Alien franchise. Now, when we think about it, the Alien franchise has been going for like 20, 25 years, has had billions of dollars spent on it, and yet the Alien only just beat off the skeletons, which were in Jason and the Argonauts some 50 years ago, and only in the final 10 minutes of the actual film. So what do we know about Ray Harryhausen? Well, he started life as a young puppeteer and animator. He was influenced heavily by a screening in 1933 of King Kong. Ray worked with King Kong animator Willis O'Brien on The Mighty Joe Young. And the film actually received an Academy Award for its special effects, but it went to Willis O'Brien. Ray then went on to have a spectacular career, establishing himself as one of the most influential stop-motion animators in film history. And I think the images here pretty much speak for themselves. They're iconic. 1 Million Years BC is getting a Blu-ray release this year, and we've worked with Studio Canal and 20th Century Fox to provide some very interesting extras and a missing Brontosaurus sequence. I think everyone has their favourites, don't they? But the artwork and the images are certainly iconic. And some have even been remade. Clash of the Titans remade, of course, about 4 or 5 years ago. And of course, the skeleton sequence we talked about earlier, which still looks spectacular today. So what didn't we know? You know, we've seen these images, we've seen them before, but what didn't we know about Ray Harryhausen and his work? Well, for every film that Ray made, there was 2 or 3 films that went unmade, such as Skin and Bones and War of the Worlds. Before George Powell made his epic War of the Worlds, Ray was going to make his, but with tripoded Martian invaders, much closer to the original source material. That would have been spectacular. Now, we have test footage of the Martians and some models as well. So it's a shame that never made it to the big screen. This is a sketch from Force of the Trojans, the official sequel to Clash of the Titans that would have come out in 1984 had all things been equal, as Ray would say. Now, here's a bit of interesting trivia. The mighty Chewbacca from Star Wars only got the part, Peter Mayhew, after appearing as Minotaur in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger the year previous to Star Wars. He was cast because he's a very tall man. He was a hospital orderly. You can see Ray there on the right and the director, Sam Wanamaker, there on the left. Now, this particular beauty we know as Joan Crawford, but can any of you guess which creature she most inspired from the Ray Harryhausen family? I'm not looking up for hands, but I can tell you it was Medusa from Clash of the Titans. So the eyes and the shape of the face and the mouth were based on Joan Crawford. So when you look at the Medusa and you think, ooh, a bit scary, that's why. You know, looking for characters in real life that we find a bit upsetting. Now, Ray was also a technical innovator as well. In a time of photochemical film, that was the only way that you could proceed. Ray used to cut his own perforations in the film stock. because with miniature rear projection, if you had any movement in the gates when you were projecting the images, then it would ruin the entire effect. So cutting his own perforations, a bit like hole punching paper, but it had to be completely accurate. There's an example of a perf cutting machine. It looks very, very Dickensian in some ways, doesn't it? Now, Ray worked with Kodak as well. He developed their 5247, very sexy sounding stock, but it was actually developed originally for television, for 16mm low contrast prints. The reason Ray developed a 35mm version of it was so that he could seamlessly integrate the live action and the foreground plates. And here's a really good example of it in the tent with the ghouls from Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger. You know, even myself, I can't see where the rear projection starts and the live action front plate begins. And similarly, in this sequence of the baboon playing chess with Jane Seymour, the baboon is in the foreground on the stool, everything else is in the background, but again, seamlessly matched. Now, Ray was an innovator in all areas. The Seven Voyages Sinbad here was the first stop-motion colour animated feature. First Men in the Moon was the first stop-motion anamorphic or cinemascope Panavision film. And it looks spectacular today. It's been rescanned in 4K by Columbia Pictures, or Sony as they're now called. These are some of the scans from that process. Now, controversially, Ray also supervised the colorization of 3 of his classic black and white science fiction films, 20 Million Miles to Earth, which you can see here, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, which is 60 years old this year, and we had a special screening of it in Germany, where we had the colour German premiere, which was fantastic. And again, it came from beneath the sea, with a 6th tentacled octopus. Ray didn't have enough money to make the 8 tentacles needed, so 2 were submerged under the bay there, under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Now, Ray was in demand by other filmmakers. Movie mogul Dino De Laurentiis called Ray in the 1975, Christmas 1975, to ask him to come on board the most expensive film ever made, and it was to be his grand remake of King Kong. Now, that was due to hit cinemas 12 months later, in December 1976. Ray had to pass on the project as 12 months was not enough time to create all of the effects shots needed. Instead, they opted for a man in a gorilla suit, played by Rick Baker, and a very large 50-foot robot made by Carlo Rambaldi. And famously, the robot only works in one particular sequence, yet the film was advertised as having this ginormous robot Kong. And controversially, when it was awarded the Academy Award, the following day in Variety, it was revealed that Kong was actually a man in a suit. They nearly lost their Academy Award. Now, why this is relevant is that the very young man in the suit, Rick Baker here, he had corresponded with Ray as a young and enthusiastic sculptor. He sent Ray a version of the Cyclops, a full-size mask version of the Cyclops. Now, Ray was so impressed with this mask that he actually kept it, and it's now part of the official Foundation collection. All these years later, Ray and Rick Baker stayed in touch, and Rick has now 7 Oscars to his name, working on a variety of films from American Werewolf in London to lots of other great movies with makeup effects and monster effects. And you can see here Rick on the left with John Landis and Peter Jackson there on the far side. So all of these men kept in touch with Ray, and anytime they were in London having a screening or a film being shown, they'd call in to see him. Now, the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation. To many people, there is only one name that is synonymous with the development of stop-motion animation, Ray Harryhausen. Not only did Ray pioneer the art of visual effects and split-screen animation, combining live action and models, but he created some of the most famous and best-loved scenes in the fantasy film genre. He directed the action on set here too. Here, a very rare scene from Jason and the Argonauts, where you can see the skeleton players are numbered. And when the sequence is refilmed, because this is a rehearsal or a block through, when it's refilmed, those artists stand aside and the performers, the actors, shadow box against what they just practiced with. And this is the final sequence. Interestingly, the censors at the time said you cannot have this sequence set at night time. So when the script was submitted to the British Board of Film Classification, they said if you want this film to pass with a general certificate, it has to be set, you know, during brunch, early lunch, that kind of thing. So we're in talks with Columbia Pictures to re-release the film in 2020 and set it back at night time. So we're quite excited about a re-release in 2020 for that. And it was what Ray wanted as well. Now, Ray created some of the best scenes in fantasy filmmaking, and what's all the more surprising is right up until his last film, Clash of the Titans, he worked completely alone. So only on this picture did he bring on a couple of animators, because the animation schedule on it was almost 3 Sinbads combined. Now, Ray conceived the animated scenes in all of his films. He designed and constructed all of the latex-covered models, including complex armatures, sketched the storyboards, supervised glass matte paintings, as you can see here, built miniature sets, and finally would film each sequence frame by frame without a video assist monitor. And when I discussed this with Ray, I'd say to him, well, why not have a video assist on Clash of the Titans? Because you could have done. And he said to me, well, John, you know, I think it's 1 extra plate to spin. And for Ray it was. You know, he was so in the zone when he was animating. The idea of having a video camera set up and a playback machine, a Viewmatic, he said it would have destroyed his work schedule. He said to me that one of the tricks he learned early on was to shoot a close-up of the model, so a reaction shot close-up. So if the tabletop got knocked or one of the bulbs went out, you could always cut in that close-up first. So very little went to waste on a Ray Harryhausen film. Now, I found 3 photographs in the Foundation's archive that have never been published before, and they show the 3 ways that interaction can be achieved. This one is the most common way, through miniature rear projection, so you can see the model here quite clearly in the foreground and the actress behind. This is the Trog from Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, which celebrates its 50th anniversary next year. Now, this looks very similar, but this is actually a front projection technique. So this sequence can be back round in the camera, and some foreground action can be placed beneath Trog's feet, and it saves the necessity for going to an optical print and losing, if you like, 1 generation. So it's money saving, it's time saving, but also it saves on the quality of the image. And the final way, blue screen, which was the least favoured method by Ray, partially because of the fringing that can appear on creatures, but also because of the expensive laboratory time. But in this sequence, it was the only possible option. Now, Ray kept everything. He could be considered a hoarder by today's standards. And we think of hoarders today, it's quite a pejorative term, you know, somebody is living amongst all of their stuff. But Ray, as a result of more than 60 years of filmmaking, had a personal collection combining in excess of 50,000 items, ranging from sketches, finished artwork, armatures, test footage, photos, negatives, books, bronze models, posters, and creatures from all of his films, making it the most complete fantasy cinema animation collection anywhere in the world. Now, on his death in May 2013, Ray bequeathed his entire collection to the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, which he set up in the mid-80s. Some of Ray's models are too fragile to travel in their current state and can only be exhibited in the UK at the moment. A programme of preservation and restoration has begun. Talos from Jason and the Argonauts and Carly from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad are in need of attention. Now, Talos here is shrunken and cracked, and the upper armature inside the upper shoulder is now clearly visible. And here's Talos in all of his film glory. Now, Carly, as with Talos, is showing bad deterioration, and the armature can be seen at the base of her spine area. The hands and the feet endured a great deal of animation during the lighting and the fight sequences. So, you know, when you consider she's over 45 years old, she's in pretty decent nick. Guanji here from the Valley of Guanji. Because Ray installed wires in the lips of the model to allow him to snarl, the mouse has begun to deteriorate, and cracking is appearing all over the model. But in better news, there's Guanji on screen. But in better news, we have a look at this magnificently restored piece the very delicate Grand Lunar from First Men in the Moon. The work on this was supervised by Alan Friswell under Ray's supervision, and he's our official restorer and conservator. Now we have a problem in that Ray only worked with Alan Friswell for restorations, so we need to now make sure that Alan Friswell is restored and conserved. So we have plans afoot to make sure he stays with us as long as is humanly possible. Now, centenary. In 2020, Ray would have been 100, but in the lead up to Ray's centenary, on his birthday, the 29th of June, we have different things planned through the foundation. It was Ray's wish that we set up a stop-motion animation scholarship in his name, and we hope to have one here in the UK, another in America, possibly at Ray's old night school, the University of Southern California. Other plans include exhibitions, conventions, and some publicly accessible works with a full-size selection of creatures currently in the works. And this is quite an impressive 7-foot Medusa that you can see behind Ray that was at the London Film Museum there for a while. Now, interestingly, most of Ray's films didn't have commentaries recorded. In a time when people are interested in extra content and hearing what the filmmakers thought, I think only 3 or 4 of Ray's films had commentaries. So I put this right and I sat with him and we went through all of the other films, about 10 of them, which didn't have commentaries, working back from Clash of the Titans. You can see me and Ray here with John Landis, the film director, who requested that he co-commentaried The Mighty Joe Young with Ray, and that's what he actually did. And we're in very early talks about making some of the films that Ray didn't make a reality for his centenary. Now that brings us on to the logo competition that we had this year. These are some of the logo entry winners, or finalists I should say, for the Harryhausen 100 logo competition. Quite an eclectic mix of designs. I like this. This would be great on a t-shirt. For anyone who remembers Viewmaster, this is like fabulous, isn't it? Good fun too. Nice artwork. Now, if Starbucks rather, did a coffee, a Kraken coffee, you'd imagine it'd probably look like this, a very corporate designed logo. This is a particular favourite of mine, and I was quite close to choosing this as the winning entry. But the winning entry, oh, that's lovely, Bubo the Owl. Make a great tattoo, that, wouldn't it? This is the final winning entry by Michael Tharm, Harryhausen 100. And for those of you who follow us on social media, you'll see this quite regularly. And we hope that Ray would have chosen this too. And interestingly, a colorized version of the Emir there from 20 million miles to Earth on the right. Now, we're coming to the end of the presentation. I'm going to be showing you my documentary short. There's me with bigger hair in the 80s. I'm not quite sure why, but I always wore dark clothing to try and make myself look older. I was 18 when I enrolled at the London Film School. All the other students were in their mid-20s. Ray had been retired since 1981, so he came to the school. It was great that he came along. I got in contact with Ray by opening up the BT telephone directory, and he was the only R. Harryhausen listed. Dialed his number. He said, hello? And I said, oh, hello, it's John Walsh here, because I had a South London accent at the time. And I said, can I make a film about your life? Oh, I don't know, maybe you should meet me at my house. So I went to meet at his house. He had a massive house in Holland Park where he kept all of the creatures. I told him about the 16mm film I wanted to make as part of my film school course. It was the first proper documentary I'd made. When I left film school, I continued making documentaries and dramas and stayed in touch with Ray. And then he asked me to be a trustee of the foundation. The documentary itself now has been scanned in high definition. We're going to have a screening of it in a moment. And rather cheekily, it's narrated by Tom Baker. I say rather cheekily because Tom Baker is famous for getting lots of money for narration. I rang his agent up and said, can I ask Tom Baker to do a narration on my film? And they said, well, which broadcaster are you from? I said, no, not a broadcaster, it's the London Film School. And they were like, oh, okay, well, what's the fee? I said, no, there's no fee, don't worry about the paperwork. So they said, well, why should he want to do a free voiceover for a film that's never going to be seen by someone who's never made a documentary before? I said, oh, it's Ray Harryhausen. So I explained to the agent that Tom Baker won the role of Doctor Who in 1974 when the producer of Doctor Who was looking for a replacement for John Pertwee. had asked lots of well-known people and not so well-known people. There was not a good fit. Ron Moody had just said no. And Barry Letts went and saw a screening of The Golden Voyage of Sinbad in Leicester Square. Tom Baker was playing evil Prince Kura in that film. The very next day, Tom Baker was called in, and the rest is TV and Doctor Who history. So Tom Baker won the role of Doctor Who after appearing in Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And I used that as emotional blackmail. So my inner producer came out and made the short film, which you're about to see. And thanks to Tom Baker making me sound good, the film helped me launch my TV and film career, and I haven't looked back since. So, it's dependent on which rubbers have been used. Some of the rubbers that Ray used on some of the puppets, the materials are no longer legal because they're quite toxic. So we have to try and find things that are similar consistencies. It is always that balance against what more recent latexes and rubbers should we be using against what Ray originally used, because I guess we don't want to be putting something on that's too modern a material, and we don't want to be recoloring the past. So it's always that balance. Every time a creature comes up for restoration, Talos and Kali are examples, we're at great pains to try and look for something that's of a similar consistency and texture, because they'll never be animated again. We're only sort of, I suppose, patching up the roof before it rains, in a sense. But it's always an ongoing discussion of what materials we should use. So, yeah. I think that you're right in that the design sensibility was recycled. The creature itself wasn't recycled. Ray rarely ever recycled creatures. And by that time, the Ymir from 20 million miles to Earth would not have been in a fit condition to have kind of performed again. But you're quite right, the snout of the creature is very reminiscent of the Ymir, and it's one of my favourites. And I think that's why Ray brought it back. It was one of his favourites, and he knew Clash would probably be his last film, so he wanted to sort of pay homage to one of his own films. I don't think so. I mean, we had a colour screening of Earth versus the Flying Saucers in Germany, and I was all ready for this colour backlash because I went out to support the colour screening because Ray had supervised it, and Ray had said to me, if he had the time and the money and film stocks were of the clarity at the time, he would have shot the original film in colour. I think the backlash has come with the remake of Clash of the Titans, where the story was massively changed, and it certainly wasn't something that Ray endorsed or approved. But I think with a colorized version and putting a sort of a day for night enhancement on Jason and the Argonauts, once the original version is also available, once people don't feel that we're recoloring the past and we're saying, no, you can't have the original anymore. Once you have the option, I think people will be curious to see if it feels different, if it feels spookier, or if they prefer the night version. And from our point of view, the more we challenge debates and challenge perceptions of Ray's films, the more we keep them alive. So we've had no pushback yet, but I'm ready for it. Bring it on. Yes, it is. I mean, there have been Gentle Giants did do a 500 limited edition piece of Bubo the Owl that Ray approved, and there have been different sort of models made in the last sort of 15 years for collectors. There was a series of Star Wars style action figures for Clash of the Titans that Mattel made in 1981, but they didn't do particularly well because if you were a toy shop and you wanted Star Wars figures, then basically you couldn't take boys' toys from other film franchises. So Battlestar Galactica, The Black Hole, Buck Rogers and Clash of the Titans ended up in W.H. Smith's. So that was a whole issue in itself. But no, we're working with toy companies and people that do sort of high-end and rather expensive merchandising. We have a Talos project at the moment called Talos Awakens, and he's been recreated in bronze from the original Talos. It's been scanned in 3D. So yes, that's possible. Well, of the three films, well, the many films that Ray didn't make, of the three major motion pictures that didn't occur, War of the Worlds and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen were the two that Ray most wanted to make that were never made. And we have sculpts from Baron Munchausen of the Man in the Moon. We have test footage of the Man in the Moon and of the Baron himself. And The Martians, again, we have test footage of the Martians coming out of the ship and so on. So I think they are the two films that Ray would probably most want to get made. Having said that, Force of the Trojans was the next one on his production slate. And we do have interesting sketches that you just saw. So I think if Ray was here now, he'd probably say, let's do Force of the Trojans and see where we are. But lots of interesting areas to mine, absolutely, yes. We actually are in talks with Sony about some of Ray's unrealized projects. The Dante's Inferno one isn't one we're in talks with, but certainly some of the other ones that Ray develops, and some have full screenplays. Force of the Trojans has a screenplay that's ready to go right now, and was written by Maggie Smith's husband, Beverly Cross, who wrote the original Clash of the Titans. So there are quite a few assets in the Foundation's archive that we could certainly mine. I think in the case of Dante's Inferno, if Ray had made that and it didn't perform well, it probably would have immediately stopped his career dead, because the problem that Ray and Charles Schneer had with these films, they were perceived to be children's films at a time when studios would market during half term. So they wouldn't be coming out in the summer in the main blockbuster time as we consider it now, but it'd be half terms before Christmas and into the new year. So when Disney were re-releasing the Aristocats and other musical animals playing the piano, Sinbad films would also get re-released. So the perception of Ray's films and where they are in the marketplace, if he did something as adult as Dante's Inferno, I think the audience wouldn't have been there for it. It's only because of the people like Peter Jackson and Jim Cameron and George Lucas, who were viewers at the time, have now grown up to be the people in charge. So they're not perceived to be children's or family films, they are a genre in themselves. I think that helps us now, but certainly it's one we'd think of if we got some of the others made. Well, when Clash of the Titans came out in '81, there'd already been 2 Star Wars films. So, and the second Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back, had some very interesting stop motion that was called Go Motion. So Phil Tippett, who was pioneer of new stop motion techniques, was, if you like, the new flame. And Ray recognised that, and he saw computers in the way that any new tool came onto the market. He saw it as a tool. And it wasn't something that interested him, but he's certainly interested in seeing that progression. But now as we come forward to the present day, there is something that's called CGI fatigue. And when you speak to producers and people who press the red buttons or the green buttons, depending on which studios, they will talk to you about CGI fatigue. If you wanted a fantasy film with these type of monsters made in the 70s, you'd pretty much have to go to Ray Harryhausen and maybe 1 or 2 other people. That's it, right? Otherwise, it's a man in a suit. Today, if you want to make something that looks like a Marvel adventure movie with all those fabulous cities being destroyed, well, there's different places you can go throughout the world. There's vast fields of animators that you can employ. And the single element between them all is that they use similar software. So they're all using, if you like, a similar digital pencil. So when everything starts to look the same and swim the same, it's because it is the same. And so audiences now are feeling a bit like, well, it's like fast food. You know, it's nice and it's filling and it's of its moment. But people are returning to stop motion. You know, commercially, they're successful again. There's Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a fantastic new animated film. And we have the filmmaker from that here today, I'm very pleased to say. You know, Ray would have been thrilled to see stop motion coming back. And when Tim Burton used to come to London regularly, he'd stop in at Ray's house and show Ray what he was doing with The Nightmare Before Christmas or James and the Giant Peach. And when he did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he brought Johnny Depp with him to the house. And Ray's daughter, Vanessa Harryhausen, said, "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, why didn't you tell me that you had Johnny Depp in there?" "I don't know who that was," he said. And he knew who Tim Burton was. He thought Johnny Depp was Tim Burton's assistant. Only because Ray wasn't up with the stars of the day. But Johnny Depp just sat there quietly listening to Ray and Tim chatting about stop motion. And of course, Mars Attacks was an homage to Ray's Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. So things have come really full circle. You know, we talk about vinyl has come back, and photochemical is coming back now. It's in some instances cheaper to shoot on film than it is to shoot on high resolution tape, depending on where you're getting your film stock from and what deal you have with the laboratory. So I'm quite hopeful that Ray would be inspired by the fact that there's lots of stop motion animators now finding their voice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the question Ray most used to get asked, and he would always ask it back to the audience as well. When I first met him, he'd ask me back. He'd say, "Well, what's your favourite scene or favourite film?" and so on. And my favourite scene from my favourite film, which is The Golden Voyage, Sinbad, there's a sequence, and it's not a jazzy, explosive fight or anything, but it's the homunculus that's been brought back to life, and it's a small winged creature that the Prince of Darkness Kura uses as a kind of a PA/bugging device. And he dies, and Kura brings him back to life with blood from his own hand. And on a kind of a marble tabletop, you see the creature basically being reborn. And it's very subtle animation. It's very creepy as it starts to kind of scream and yell as it's reborn. And it's really effective. And when we've shown Ray's films to family audiences today who are used to CG, it will be those sequences, or the Medusa, or Bubo the Owl. People are really enchanted. So for me, it's Golden Voyage of Sinbad. Well, this year we had 3 film anniversaries. It's the 35th anniversary of Clash of the Titans, the 50th anniversary of 1 million years BC, and that's getting a Blu-ray release later this year, finally, and the 60th anniversary of Earth vs. the Flying Saucers. Now, for next year, it's the 40th anniversary of Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. So we have special screenings planned for that. The film has been scanned in 4K and looks absolutely spectacular. It has stereo sound for the first time ever. And we're going to be having some screenings with that and hopefully bringing along some of the creatures. For that film, every creature survives and is in pretty good nick because the film was 1977-78 production period, so relatively recent. And the creatures are in good condition. So I'm hoping to have a screening of that. Maybe we'll come back to Anifest and have a special Eye of the Tiger screening. Ray he liked 3D. I mean, he liked the idea of revisiting his films and colorizing them. He certainly liked the idea of 3D. He wouldn't have had an objection to his films being retrofitted for 3D. I think they would suit them quite well once the original version was also there. I think this is the kind of get out of jail card I have when people try to lynch me at colour screenings. I say, but we have the black and white one in HD too. I think it's fine, and Ray liked that. Anything that innovative and brought it to a new audience. To colorise a film means that it will continue to be shown. Some broadcasters will not buy black and white films, period. Some broadcasters now will not touch a film unless it's remastered in HD, period. And that's fairly standard now across television. One of the reasons the BBC doesn't repeat lots of its old programmes isn't just because they're in 4:3, which is the old square format, but because unless they've been shot on 16mm film, you can't create a HD master. So if your film is in standard definition, it's not going to get shown again. So if retrofitting it for 3D future protects it, then great, I'd say. Well, he certainly liked in the 70s what was happening with science fiction. And when First Men in the Moon came out, it wasn't as well received as perhaps some of the Sinbad films. So I think he felt that he was a bit, ahead of the curve in some ways there. But he greatly admired those technical innovations with motion control that George Lucas was doing, which seemed very advanced computer. It was called computer special effects at the time because computers were used to control the cameras and the models. Of course, the image wasn't produced by a computer. So Ray was fascinated by that. Anything that involved a technical innovation, he was fascinated by. But also people working, if you like, in parallel with him, like Derek Meddings, who worked on the Superman films and James Bond. Ray knew Derek Meddings. And in another lifetime, Ray could have had a similar life to Derek Meddings, who was but employed as a gun for hire on films, but never owned any of the props and was never fabulously wealthy in the way that Ray was. So he certainly admired other filmmakers. And Jerry Anderson, who made the Thunderbird series, he used to meet occasionally at conventions, and they'd have great time swapping stories about laboratories and producers and so on. So no, he was somebody who loved to mix and loved to talk. He was quite isolated in the way that he worked and the fact that he worked alone. So any opportunity to speak to filmmakers and to find out what they're doing, he really relished that. Well, the interesting thing, I think I can tell you this now because Charles Schneer and Ray Harryhausen, it was a big film for them, Clash of the Titans. It was their biggest budget, but they had some of their biggest problems. And when they were shooting the background plates, it was the last day they had in that location in Spain, and it started to rain. And it really affected the work on that sequence. So it was cut considerably shorter because some of the plates simply wouldn't work. And Charles Schneer wouldn't allow for a reshoot. And that created a real tension that I think existed beyond the film and into the sequel. So well spotted, but we have all 3 Scorpions in the Foundation's archive. But if one's escaped, who knows, it could get its own Sunday night special.
That was a good question, Brendan. So we thank John for a fantastic talk.